Thanks, Mr. Combs. Good morning. My name is Jack Post, and this is my STEM Capstone project for my company for this class called the Traffic Company. For this class, we create a little bit of like a mock company, and so that kind of guides our project and should be the brand identity of our project. But before I hop into the project, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. So, my name is Jack Post, as I already said, and here at Grandview, I'm involved in a lot. I'm in student leadership, I'm in cyber patriot, I'm in TSA, I do speech and debate, I'm a part of NHS and FBLA. I also am a lifeguard and a swim instructor over the summers, and this summer I'll be an infrastructure engineering intern at Hewitt Systems, which is super exciting. And then this fall, I'll be going to Northern Arizona University, where I'll be double majoring in civil and electrical engineering, which has stemmed from my passion for this project. And to begin this class, well, I had to explore a little bit more about my passion. And so I had to think of what kind of engineering I wanted to do. So looking at my resume, it would make a lot of sense knowing I have a certified SolidWorks associate professional expert. And I love 3D printing, and I love Arduinos, and I've taken AP Computer Science Principles in A, and I've taken every engineering course here at Grandview for me to do mechanical engineering. But after taking all of these classes, I know SolidWorks is not always fun to work with. So I decided to do civil. Well, jokes aside, that's not really the reason why, but I do like the high wages of civil that are pretty comparable to mechanical at an average wage of $95,000, and it's a huge growing field. And in the last decade, it has seen some of the most growth of any field and will continue to do so as the workforce is aging right now. It's also super flexible work, which means I'm not tied down to only one kind of job. I could do traffic engineering, I could do structural engineering, I could do things with water and land surveying. So it's a ton that I could do. And my grandpa, he was a city planner, which runs kind of parallel to civil engineering, and I really thought his job was awesome, and he loved it, so I think civil engineering will be perfect to me. Knowing that, I had to decide what my project would be. And if you know anything about me, I hate traffic and I love driving. And so, over the last year, I've come and put together...
Sorry. A little loud.
Yeah. See if we can mute that. But I've put together some clips over the last year of different traffic, and I just hate every time you come up to a red light, it seems like it'll immediately turn green. Or as soon as you come up to a green light, it'll turn red right on you, which is no fun. Or sometimes you'll just be stopped at a light and traffic won't even be going another way and there's a red for you. So that was my goal to fix, to make sure there weren't any random reds or reds that just made no sense to stop at. And so that's where I got to my project, which is to fix the traffic system, most specifically through the manual on uniform traffic control devices, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But basically, what I'm looking to do is make sure lights are consistent everywhere, have vehicle detection sensors that are relevant to climate, have power fail-safes, universal communication devices, have more traffic coordination, and signage and lights that are visible to everyone, which means colorblind people too. And so, to do this, I had to put together a dream team. And I had my expert advisor for this class, Iris Law, who unfortunately couldn't be here because she's sick, help me with so much of this project and give me so many resources to be able to put this whole project together. And she's genius. She does so much in the industry. She's worked in government and private sectors. She has a master's in civil, and she's pursuing her PhD, which means she's doing a ton of research in traffic engineering, which is exactly what I'm looking to do. So she was the perfect advisor to help me out during this project. Thanks, Iris, if you're watching at home. And then I had my support advisors. So first I had Nitin Sendil, who was originally my logistics man, but that didn't quite work out, and he just kind of became my distraction, showing me different memes and showing me some interesting images during class too. So thanks, Nitin, appreciate you. Then I also had Malay Kelkar, who is my professional realist, and he helped me look at this presentation, make sure it was perfect, and tell me whenever my project was boring or stupid or anything like that. So thanks, Malay. Then I had my mom, Megan Post, and she's the creative idea maker for my project, because as soon as I told her about this class, she had about like 10 million ideas of what I should do. First she's like, oh, you should do all these medical devices, and then she was giving me ideas for what I could do with my traffic coordination, and she was super helpful with that. And then I have my dad, who I'm sure Iris Law and every single other traffic manager hates, because he's a professional complainer, no doubt about it. But I will give him props. He did try to prevent me from being electrocuted by my traffic light with 120 volt electricity. So, thanks, Dad. Let's get into a little bit of what I did for this project, though. And unfortunately, since I was helping so many other people with Ian Spelling, Niblin on Amazon, Kyra on Arduino, engine videos to Colton, redesigning Kevin's car, 3D printing everything, and talking stocks with Mitchell, I actually don't have a project. So, thank you very much. Any questions? No, I'm just kidding. So I actually did a lot of work in a couple different categories. I did a lot of administrative work for this class, which included writing journals, always on time. I did a lot of research. I made an actual MUTCD revision standard, and you can see right here, I built a traffic light. So I'll delve a little bit more into all of that. But I want to give you guys an overview of what I did when, or at least first, what I plan to do. And I thought my project was going to be a lot more doing stuff and a lot less research than it actually ended up being. So I thought my research period would just be October. And it was not, safe to say. So originally I thought I was going to be making traffic algorithms and actually putting together some kind of scale system, but that didn't end up making sense for the scope of my project. So I revised it and stayed on track with what I originally wanted to do or wanted to coordinate. However, I just made it a lot more research-based. So I looked first into all the stuff my expert advisors helped me with, and then I looked into traffic patterns, vehicle detection, signage, traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, case studies, and then I finally built my traffic light at the end of March. And so, with all of this, a lot of research had to be done. So I'll get a little bit into that research, and we'll start with the MUTCD, which is what I kind of mentioned at the beginning. And you might be wondering, what is the MUTCD? Well, it's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I know, it's super greatly named. Very creative idea makers down at Civil Engineering. But basically, it's just a standard for different traffic lights, which includes the traffic lights themselves, it includes signage on the road, it includes road markings, and it also includes the coordination of light. And it's a federal manual that's mandated to be adopted in some sense by each and every state. And so the reason why I decided to use the MUTCD is not because it's a 1,200-page document, though that was not fun to read through, but because it's a huge standard on traffic lights that is most used across the United States. And so though there are traffic engineering manuals that are also used to kind of provide guidance on how to coordinate traffic, those are not used by everyone the same way and aren't consistent. There's also state MUTCDs, which kind of adopt the federal one and make their own changes, but those also aren't consistent for state to state to state. However, they do all use the federal guidelines and just add on to that. So for my project, knowing I wanted to make a broad scope project, I decided to modify the federal MUTCD. And well, it had a lot of room for improvement. Because in that MUTCD, there is so much inconsistent signage, and there's vague coordination standards that make it super inconsistent from one place to another how lights will be coordinated, which leads to huge traffic jams. You might be wondering why any of this actually matters to you though. And I'm sure if you've driven down Arapahoe or Parker Road, you know how much traffic sucks. And pretty much every area does coordinate traffic, they just don't do it the same. Because the goal of coordinating traffic is to put together a little pie of time. Imagine like the time of a whole cycle to go from the same green to the same green. To where cars travel through and then stop, allowing for cars to turn in, and then stop, allowing cars to turn in from another intersection, and so on and so forth. And this coordination should allow cars to travel directly through green to green to green if coordination is done right. The issue arises though when different jurisdictions don't coordinate in the same way, because a lot of jurisdictions have different offsets for their timing, which basically means when you come up to a light, the light should turn green before you get to the light. So some jurisdictions don't have an offset like this, or they have a very small one. So that's when you get to a light and it immediately turns green after you stop at the light. My standard will actually allow for all these different jurisdictions to have the same kind of offset to where you're going straight through a green instead of having to stop if you're the first car in that line of greens. And in reality, all of this means with all these inconsistencies of jurisdictions that there's isolated traffic coordination. So say you're in the town of Parker. If you're driving through Parker, it's likely that all of your lights will line up pretty well and traffic won't be too bad coordinating lights. However, if you're driving between us and Parker, well, that's where you'll have issues. Because, well, here's a map from Regis all the way down to Costco. And the light right about here marks the lights that are starting to be controlled by Parker all the way down. The lights from this one going backwards, though, are not controlled by Parker and are controlled by several different jurisdictions. There's some down here that are controlled by Colorado Department of Transportation. Further down, there's City of Aurora. And then somewhere intermixed in there, there's some Arapahoe County as well. And this little mixing of all these different jurisdictions is where you get traffic, because they don't always talk to each other. And it gets even worse on Arapahoe Road. Because this is Arapahoe Road from my house at Buckley all the way down to Grandview High School. And this is one of the worst drives because down Arapahoe Road, there's even more jurisdictions and less actual coordination. Especially because the Arapahoe County doesn't have the budget of some of the larger cities. So a lot of the times they fail to have effective vehicle detection, which means that you often will stop at these lights or they won't detect your car or anything like that. So traveling down this road, you might get really jammed up early on Arapahoe Road. And then once you get down towards Grandview where the lights are controlled by the City of Aurora, even though the coordination is better, all of the jammed up traffic from earlier on means that the later coordination takes a while to get any kind of impact. And you won't be seeing that until you get near the Cherry Peak Trail area, actually. So I had to decide what to do about this. And my overall idea for what to do is to have smart traffic cabinets at each intersection, to have traffic sensors at each intersection that are based on climate so they always work, and required interjurisdictional communication so everyone has to work together. And so let's start with those smart controllers. And I actually looked at one of these with my expert advisor, Iris Law, and the main things that were a part of these traffic controllers is this main box here, which is a traffic controller. It receives all the information from cameras and from people waiting at sensors and puts it all together to be able to say, hey, this light should turn green now, and this light should turn green now. And that's what adaptive traffic control is. It takes the amount of cars that are waiting at a light and decides when to turn a light green and when to allow for turns to come in. The other crucial part of a smart traffic cabinet, though, is the vehicle detection processors, such as the one that's in here right on that left side. This is a NeoVision unit, and that one takes in a 360 camera data and actually is able to tell which lane is where based on zones that are set and how many cars are waiting in each lane to send what are called calls to the traffic controller, which basically means it'll tell the traffic controller it has 1, 2, 3, or 4 cars waiting, which will tell it when it needs to change the light, or if there's higher than usual demand, which means that at midnight you'll probably be getting straight greens and have like one arrow for a short amount of time, whereas during the day you'll have much longer light cycles with this smart controller. The other part that's crucial to have a smart cabinet and smart controller, though, is the sensors themselves. And though there's a common misconception that all sensors are the same, like a camera or an induction loop or a radar, pretty much every jurisdiction uses something different. In fact, Parker uses all 3 of these. And to each of these, there are pros and cons. Induction loop sensors are great if you live in California or Florida, because they work awesome, they're super cheap, and they're super effective at detecting your car, because right as you drive your car on top of the sensor, it'll detect that your car's there, change the inductance in the loop, and send a signal right down to the traffic controller, with another one way back calling a load loop to detect if there's a buildup of traffic too, to put in more calls to allow for more green time. The only issue is these often get super covered up in snow and ice. And so some places like Parker have these induction loop sensors on their side roads, such as Parker and Lincoln. They actually have an induction loop sensor, and a lot of the times in the winter, that sensor gets covered up and is not super reliable. So for areas like us, it might make sense to have more cameras as well. And cameras are pretty easy to use, though they do need maintenance because they need to be cleaned off, especially after storms. One way that you can reduce this though is by allowing for 360-degree cameras, which basically just means there's one camera at the intersection instead of 4 at each post of a 4-way intersection. And so a 360 camera only needs installing once and cleaning one time to be able to be effective. And though it does need this cleaning, it's a good balance of price and performance, because these lights cost in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 to have this camera add a light. And for reference, induction loop sensors are around $5,000 to install on each light. So they're the cheapest, and cameras are kind of a balance of that. But radars, they're definitely the best, but they're super expensive. Looking in around the $80,000 range per light, and you need often multiple of them at a light. So it's a super expensive system. However, it does work in harsh weather. So if you're living in Alaska, you might see a lot more radar sensors there because it can basically see through the snow. And so it's super effective in tracking traffic in harsh weather conditions. So my standard will kind of take all of this and put it into one coherent place. And so it will say induction loops are allowed in mild climates such as California and Florida. And then camera sensors should be used when a budget is required and in an area where climate isn't, or where there's a moderate climate. And then radar is for extreme weather conditions. The last part of this coordination though is making sure all of the different jurisdictions we were talking about actually talk to one another, because that's the most crucial part. And so my goal is to have coordination enforced within a mile range. And so remember that road I talked about, Parker Road, going from Costco to Regis? Well, in that range, there's about just over a half a mile stretch between two lights. And with the current MUTCD standard, that is not required to be coordinated at all. So you could hit a red there, and then the next light down the road, you could hit a red right again, which will build up traffic, especially knowing how busy Parker Road is. Though in reality, this probably is coordinated. In some areas, a light like that might just not be coordinated, especially if it's between different jurisdictions. So the way I propose to fix this is to require that mile enforcement of coordination, and that cannot depend on different jurisdictions as well. So that means that different ones have to talk to each other, and part of my MUTCD revision is requiring intergovernmental agreements, which basically means that these different agencies have to talk to one another and have to make sure that they're doing stuff. The other thing that I propose in my MUTCD revision is public data sharing, which is done in some places like Palo Alto. And this will basically just provide live feed results of cameras across the different areas, and it will also provide live traffic data for both other jurisdictions to be able to use in their coordination themselves, and it will also allow them to be able to be transparent to the public, especially if like a light goes down or there's an issue in coordination. The public will have access to that knowledge, which will make it more seamless for both governments and for the public as well. And so this is my whole idea for the coordination part of this project, but the other half of the MUTCD, actually the majority of it, is signage. So how about we talk about a little bit of the signage in the MUTCD, which is quite frankly a little bit of a mess, because right now there's not even a required speed unit. In fact, in parts of Arizona, the speed is signed in kilometers per hour. And not all modern cars use kilometers per hour or have it on their main dash, and you have to go into a settings menu to see that. So it can be super confusing for people trying to drive, or for people not even knowing that it's in kilometers and just assuming it's miles to be able to drive through there. So I will definitely be requiring miles per hour in my MUTCD revision. The other part of signage that I want to look into is the color distinctions. Because right now, there's a couple of different black signs. There's a night speed limit, which is a black sign, which makes sense. However, there's also a black sign that's called right turn across tracks. And there's no white version of this, and it doesn't mean no right turn across tracks only at night. It just means no right turn across tracks. And even though there's other signs that are about tracks, such as not stopping on tracks that are in white, there's just random signs that are different colors that don't really mean anything, and certainly not to an average user of the road. But the other part of signs I want to look into are making them more symbol-based. Because as I'm sure you saw back here, all of these different signs are pretty much just text-based. So if you're coming to America and you don't speak English or you can't read it super well, it can be super hard to drive on the road. And pretty much the rest of the world uses symbols on everything they do because they adopt what's called the Vienna Convention on signage, which allows them to just have symbols or symbols mixed with a little bit of text, which means that we can still have lots of information on how to use signs with that text, but also symbols can make it clear to everyone. So just think of an express only lane. Right now, it just says express only, arrow down. Well, if we went to symbols, we could have something similar to this bus lane, where it's like an express icon with an arrow down saying it's express. So it'll make a little bit more sense to people who are traveling here from abroad too. And then the last part of the signs I wanted to look into is making lights more accessible to everyone and more consistent. Because a lot of the times, lights are, like left turn lights, are a solid green, or they're a flashing yellow, or they're a solid with a flashing yellow, or a solid with a solid green arrow. And so it can be confusing for a lot of people to be able to get through these lights. So my traffic project is trying to standardize that. So traffic are left turn arrows such as this with a steady green to make sure that you can turn without yielding, a flashing yellow to yield, and then a yellow and a red for stopping, which can make it a lot easier for people to understand. And then the last part of it is color blindness, because this was brought up in my project proposal, accessibility for people who are colorblind, and it's actually a huge issue because you can see, I found a little website online that put on a red-green colorblind filter for a normal traffic light, and that's really hard to tell what light is where because they all just turn yellow pretty much. And though you can tell like which position the light is in, at night that's really hard to do when only one light is illuminated. So if you're driving up to a light at night and it just looks like one of these yellow blobs, you might think it's red, you might think it's green, and you might just go through it by accident if you're not paying too much attention. So my proposed solution is to allow a little bit of orange into the red light and a little bit of blue into the green light. So that would look like this light down here, which doesn't look too strange to any of us. It looks pretty similar to what we normally have. However, with that same exact filter, it looks so much more clear to anyone who has color blindness, which is huge for any of those people. So, putting this all together, I made my final MUTCD revision. And you're welcome to take a look at my back computer back there when I'm done with my presentation, or scan this QR code if you want to read every single part of it. But my revision is signal coordination, vehicle detection, accessibility, energy reliability, and standardization of signal design, which is all what we just talked about. And after I did this, I looked into if this was actually effective to do through some case studies. And I found that it was, because Greenwood Village back in the early 2000s actually did this with a set of 40 signals, and they found that it alleviated a lot of traffic congestion. However, with the adaptation of new technology and traffic coordination, this agreement fell apart, and that's no longer the case. And the same goes for signage. I found that colorblind people really do struggle to view signs, and this was found with several online studies that cite that this is a huge issue that increases accidents. Similarly to the inconsistency in turning signs, which has also been found to significantly increase accidents as well. With that all done, I had a little bit more time left in class. And so, if you haven't already fallen asleep, or you haven't already started scrolling TikTok or Subway Surfers, we'll finally get to my light. Because I did every part of my project objectives, including exploring civil, learning about traffic patterns, adopting solutions to a wide variety, contacting industry professionals, and making a standard, except for electrical engineering, which is where my traffic light came in. Because I had to wire this whole light to be safe with high voltage, and also to make sure I could control the whole light as well, which is something I had never done before. And so I had to do a lot of code on figuring out how to use an IR controller and a relay control. So I could go ahead up to my light and do this. Turn it on, turn it off, Maybe? Awesome. And then I also gave it a couple of different modes where it could cycle through the lights as well. Just like that. So that was the last part of my project that I spent the last month doing. And though I might have gotten it off of Facebook Marketplace from a guy named John, who may or may not have stolen it from DIA, I'm glad I have my light, and it'll be going up in my garage after this project. So, with all of that done, I accomplished each and every one of my project objectives. So, I'd say my project is a huge success. Even though this probably could not be adapted in a real-world situation because of government budgets and strict timelines that would not allow for it, this project would be the ideal traffic coordination that could happen if somehow governments could all agree. So if this would happen, well, I would love it, because then I would not be going down Arapahoe and Parker Road stopping at every single red light. Any questions? Yeah.
I just noticed this, especially driving at night, and I need to know if I'm crazy or not. I noticed that, full disclosure, when I'm speeding at night, when I approach a light, it will purposely turn red, do a full cycle where there's like no one else going, and then turn green. And I was wondering if does the light do it on purpose to make me stop speeding?
No, it doesn't do it on purpose, actually, though that would kind of be smart, and it is kind of a byproduct. At the beginning, I kind of showed you those time diagrams where if you kept going the same speed, you'd hit green after green after green. However, if you start to go a lot faster than that, your slant will kind of change, and then you'll hit red, and then green, and then red, and then green, because you just won't travel through that steady set of greens where it's coordinated to do. And so if there's coordination, it'll be based on a speed limit or a tested speed on the road that is the average speed people travel, which is most common, but it won't purposely stop you.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, Quinn?
Were you able to look into the budgeting of your proposal to see if it would actually be able to be affordable for different places?
Yeah, so for the most part, this is affordable for different places because everything that I cited is technology that's already used pretty universally. It's just not used in conjunction with one another and isn't coordinated between jurisdictions. And so a lot of the times this technology can be implemented or already is there, but just needs some more work to be coordinated with other jurisdictions or coordinated with itself. Yeah, back there.
I know that some places have sensors inside of the traffic lights so that emergency vehicles can change traffic lights.
Yeah.
Would you want to incorporate this into your design?
Yeah, this is already incorporated in pretty much every light. It's called an Opticom sensor, and basically when the cars come by, it uses almost an IR kind of sensor that just sends a light signal up to that little sensor at the top. And that's government required and always has been, so it's definitely a part of it, yeah. Yeah.
So to actually like implement this into the lights, what would we have to like do now? Would it just be like reprogramming them, or we actually have to like take on the lights, like rewire them, rebuild them?
Yeah, good question. So most of it would just be reprogramming the lights. Some places would require new sensors, such as Parker. I was talking about having those induction loop sensors. So installing something like radar, which they have around there a lot, or installing 360-degree cameras as well would be great. George?
Do you have any sort of general estimate on how much it can cost to actually implement your new standard?
Well, it depends exactly what you're using per light, but the sensors themselves, for an area around here, sensors themselves would probably cost around $20,000, with traffic control units costing more than that. So I think an average light would be somewhere in the range of $100,000 per stop, which is pretty typical. Joe?
This is like an incredibly interesting project. Do you plan on expanding this either with your time at AU or beyond?
I'd like to. I'm not sure if I'll be expanding on it some more, but I know I will be doing some infrastructure engineering this summer. So maybe I can involve something with that. And also, at NAU, I plan to do some traffic research or looking into traffic engineering as well, which they do have a program for. So I might be involving some of that information there again, too. Rihanna?
What would you say was one of your biggest setbacks during this project, and how did you overcome it?
I'd say my biggest setback was not knowing what I was doing at the beginning. Because when I started, I had no idea what I was doing with traffic coordination at all. So we were told we had to make a timeline and all of this. was like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do for the next 5 months. So it was really hard for me to kind of think ahead at what I was doing for a project I didn't know I was doing. Parker?
When you proposed this to your expert advisor, were there anything that she thought that was like outside the box thinking, or things that this is like, yeah, we've kind of already thought of all these things, but government's just kind of not implementing or updating?
That was a lot of it was him saying like, this is a lot of what we do, and this is, like we have all of these here in Aurora, or Parker had some of them dispersed through. It was just kind of that coordination, because I talked to a professor from NAU, I talked to Iris Law from Aurora, and I talked to David Adden from Parker, and they all said that this was stuff they had, but they also all said different things about what they did with their systems too. So that's where it kind of came up with that interjurisdictional coordination. So a lot of that was stuff that they have. They did like the idea of unifying that standard, and I got the idea from the MUTCD from that professor at NAU. Colton?
If I'm driving down like a rapid or something, right, and I come up to a light and all 3 lights just turn on, what am I supposed to do?
All 3 lights turn on. Well, hopefully it's not my light where all 3 turn on. But it would just be probably a flash where you'd stop like a stop sign. Yeah. Jail?
Okay, so I know I kind of passed this through, but if you could go back to August, with everything that you had now, with your information about traffic lights and all of the standards in different jurisdictions, would you redo this traffic project, or would you focus on something else? Whether it's like sensors specifically, or potentially just making a new traffic light from scratch?
If I could redo this, I mean, I'd probably have most of the knowledge I have, so I'd do this part of it in a lot less time. But then I'd add on like pedestrian crossings, more energy stuff that I could do too, and more like bike lanes, that kind of stuff too, with signage and road markings and more. Any last questions? Michael?
What's the language of the software?
What's the what?
Language of the software.
So the software I used to run this light is C++. I don't know what language runs any of the processing of the different cameras and stuff. It's pretty proprietary software. Anything else?
Last question.
Alright, so when you're driving down Parker, the thing that bothers me is we'll come up to a light, it'll be green, and it'll go yellow, and we're like, alright, there's no time to like actually stop safely. And then like as you get to the light, it turns red. Do you know how that yellow light is timed?
The yellow light, normally the rule of thumb is a second for every 10 miles an hour that you're going. Different jurisdictions will kind of just do what they want to do, but you know, rule of thumb, if you're going down a Arapahoe, it'll be like 4 seconds. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.